Hi guys. Before we proceed to this video, we've got something very important to share with you. Neoliberalism, Inequality and Authoritarianism by Professor Jon V. Kofas is available for purchase. You can order it directly from the publisher Little French eBooks or through Amazon.
Hello everyone, welcome. One of the greatest tragedies of 2025 is indeed the bombing of Iraq, first by Israel, beginning on June 12, 2025, and then 9 days later, the United States joining to bomb 3 nuclear development sites in Iran. Obviously, there have been, the greatest of all the tragedies has been the deaths of civilians. That is the greatest tragedy on all sides. The other is the extraordinary destabilization of the region and the reality that military solutions have been sought in place of diplomacy, circumventing on the part of the United States both the Congress of the United States seeking War Powers Act authorization, as well as the United Nations appealing to the United Nations Security Council. The United States did have options, and the option that was the most important was, of course, to continue the dialogue with Iran in order to find a diplomatic solution to the nuclear development issue. Did Israel and did the United States bomb Iran because of the so-called nuclear development problem that they see? And regarding that, as far as Israel is concerned, as well as the United States and the West, as an existential threat to Iran. The question is, which of these parties, of the 3 countries, is an existential threat? First, let's look at empirical data. Let's put aside the rhetoric. Israel is estimated to have 90 nuclear weapons. The United States in the neighborhood of 5,000 nuclear warheads. The United States is the world's largest defense spender. In fact, it spends more on defense than the next 10 to 11 countries combined in the world. Okay. And if you include NATO, if you put NATO and US in there, they spend the bulk of the world's defense, contrary to arguments that they are on the defensive and the other side is the aggressor, considering the so-called other side, namely Iran, Russia, and China. When you look at their defense spending, it is but a trickle in comparison to the combined US, NATO, Israeli defense spending. Putting this issue in perspective, the real goal of the United States and Israel was never nuclear weapons. The argument that Iran has been close to developing nuclear weapons has been around since the presidency of Bill Clinton. Over 30 years now, they've been close and close. Iranian officials have been saying, and independent sources, including the United Nations, that Iran could develop nuclear weapons if it wanted to. In fact, during the Manhattan Project that Robert Oppenheimer, the American nuclear physicist, led in the 1940s, that developed the atomic bomb, nuclear scientists back then maintained, and they still do, that nuclear weapon development is really in the human mind. It will not take a lot to develop nuclear weapons if a country wanted to develop nuclear weapons. And Iran could have developed nuclear weapons. It just had not wanted to, because the economy of Iran is very weak. This is not a regime that has particularly been in harmony with the Western world since the revolution of 1979. One of the reasons is because of Western sanctions and Israel constantly pursuing the same policy as the United States in the Middle East, namely destabilization policy. The destabilization policy is intended to make certain that the regional balance of power in the Middle East is determined by Israel, and that the Gulf states, which are the conservative Gulf states, which of course include Saudi Arabia, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, all pro-West, all pro-Israel, as we have found out during this bombing, all of these want a regime that is weakened in Iran. They proved that during the 2010s, when there was a civil war in Yemen, and the Saudi regime, backed by the United States, United Kingdom, Israel, were against the Houthi rebels, Iranian, loyal to Iran ideologically, by the way, in Yemen, and trying to maintain an authoritarian regime there in one of the poorest countries in the world, with one of the highest poverty rates in the world. The goal has been to go back to pre-1979 Shah of Iran era, an era of subservience of Iran to the West and to Israel. That has been the goal, not nuclear weapons. That has been a pretext, always has been a pretext, because they don't have nuclear weapons. Israel has nuclear warheads, and it is not a signatory country to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, by the way, something that even independent observers point out, not necessarily Iran. The latest development is just yesterday, the Trump administration, after Iran used a short-term and intermediate ballistic missile in Qatar to hit U.S. bases in Qatar, a loyal country to the United States, from which the U.S. launched operations, by the way, and a major base. The U.S., by the way, has military bases throughout the Middle East. When you look at a map of U.S. military bases, U.S. military operations, it is replete. The Middle East map looks like a map of U.S. military operations. Nevertheless, that operation hardly a success as far as the West is concerned. After that, immediately Trump announced ceasefire between Israel and Iran, and immediately both sides, of course, attacked each other, exchanged fire. But we'll have to wait and see what happens. What will not change is, even if the ceasefire holds and there is a truce and so forth, what will not change is U.S., Israeli, Western goals of regime change in Iran. That has been the case since the revolution of 1979. And let's make one point clear. The revolution of 1979, which was a heterogeneous revolution, there were many elements involved, from the Tudeh Party, which is the Communist Party of Iran, to Islamist elements, Shia elements. Ayatollah Khomeini eventually took over, and and he created an institutionalized theocratic society, essentially. That's fine. That's what it is. But with an anti-Israeli, anti-West position, not necessarily, by the way, back then pro-communist either. This is Islam. But since then, Iran has been forging close ties with two countries that the United States regards as enemies. Russia strategically, geopolitically, as the Iranian foreign minister just recently, in his recent trip to Moscow, after talks with Vladimir Putin, mentioned that there is a geopolitical relationship that's very solid with Russia and the Russian Federation, and a very deep economic relationship with China. The U.S. position is to make sure that the Middle East does not fall increasingly under the aegis, geopolitically and geoeconomically, of Russia and China. And that's what this is about. It has nothing to do with nuclear weapons development. In fact, if Iran did have nuclear weapons, let's assume that it did, this would not have happened. It happened because it does not. So this chaos took place because it does not. In the longer video, I point out many aspects of this, including how Iran discovered and the world discovered that it really doesn't have many allies in the Muslim world. Unfortunately, even Pakistan, which a lot of people, and including Pakistanis, thought that it would be on the side of Iran. It turns out that wasn't so certain. That wasn't true. Anyway, there are many elements of this, including the fact that the larger issue that a country's foreign policy is a reflection of its domestic policy. So when you look at the domestic policy of Israel, it's an apartheid society. It has half the population is Israeli Jews, the other half, more or less, Palestinians, most of them Muslim. They're also Christians, by the way. And they are marginalized. There is an apartheid. That's reality. Ethnic cleansing. There is a genocide war. This was part of the distraction of Netanyahu to distract from that, which is ongoing, by the way, as the United Nations keeps mentioning. And the policy of the United States, of course, also domestic policy that is replete in political and social and economic divisions and chaos, considering what has been happening in the last few weeks with regard to the issue of undocumented workers, especially in Los Angeles County, with immigration authorities going out there using force to go after, not as the government claims, criminal migrants, but are actually ordinary workers, many of whom have been in the United States more than 10 years, about half of them that have been in the United States. So the foreign policy of militarism is really an expression, a continuation, if you will. And this is, by the way, this has nothing to do with Israel, not just with Israel and the United States, but this is true of societies from ancient times to the present. A country's foreign policy is really an extension and a reflection of what it does domestically, part of what we call the overall social contract. I invite you to take a look at the analytical video, to write comments, ask questions, and I thank you for joining. Please join this channel. It's an educational channel, and we have a lot more issues. Thank you very much.